What if I told you that some of these ancient, really mysterious texts could actually tell us something profound about how our own minds work right now? We're about to dive into a way of thinking that feels, well, almost alien, but at its core, it's about as human as it gets.
Okay, so take a look at this. This comes from a text called the Shams al-Maʿārif. Now, to you and me, it might look like a cool piece of abstract art, right? Or maybe some kind of complex diagram. But for the people who made it, this was technology. It was literally an engine for understanding and interacting with reality. So the big question is, what do we make of this? Was this all just, super elaborate superstition? Or, and this is the interesting part, does it show us a totally different, but maybe equally valid way that the human mind can work? That's exactly what we're going to dig into.
So, to really get a handle on this, you first have to appreciate just how ambitious this whole project was. I mean, these people were trying to create a complete map of everything. And this wasn't just some one-off idea. You see this popping up all over the world. From the Arabic Shams al-Araf that we just saw, to the Jewish Kabbalistic text, the Sefer Yetzirah, different civilizations were all trying to do the same thing. Build this one grand unified system. They wanted to connect the human mind, language, and the whole cosmos. They were convinced there was a hidden order, and they were trying to find it.
So when you look at these incredibly complex grids and tables, it's easy to think of them as just, well, lists of data. But that's not it at all. They saw these as an operating system for reality itself. Scholars have a name for it. They call it a symbolic correspondence system. So let's break down how this thing actually works.
Okay, so what's the architecture of this symbolic OS? Well, you might be surprised. It's actually very logical. It's very structured.
All right, you can pretty much break it down into four main parts. First up, you've got your symbolic primitives. Think of these as the absolute basic building blocks: letters, numbers, divine names, that sort of thing. Then you have operators. These are basically the rules for how you combine those building blocks, like shuffling them around through permutation. The third layer, and this is where it gets really interesting, is the correspondence tables. This is the part that maps all these symbols across different layers of reality. And finally, you have compression devices. Things like those incredible magic squares. They take all this massive cosmic data and pack it into one single portable diagram. It's a tool you could actually use. Like someone might use these tables to figure out the perfect celestial alignment, combine it with the right divine names, and create a talisman on a metal seal for protection. It's a whole system.
The core idea here, the absolute bedrock of this whole system, is that everything is connected to everything else in a meaningful way. So, letters have numerical values, right? And those numbers correspond to divine names, which are linked to planets, which govern specific times of the year, which then influence forces in the world. See, it's this massive, intricate web of symbolic connections.
Now, if this way of linking things together feels a little strange, or maybe even a bit random, you're not alone. But here's the thing. It actually has a lot in common with a state of mind that every single one of us experiences every single night.
Yeah, let's compare it to dreaming. Think about dream logic, right? In dreams, you have this incredibly high level of associative linking. You connect things because they sound similar or look similar or just feel similar, not because of strict logic. Both dreams and these texts are amazing at pattern completion. A tiny little cue can suddenly blossom into a whole scene or idea. And crucially, both are way more interested in internal coherence, making things feel right, than they are with measuring things out in the objective external world.
Okay, but, and this is a really important but, just because it feels like a dream doesn't mean it is a dream, not even close. The people who created these systems, they were wide awake, and they were operating under a very different and very strict set of rules.
So that brings us to the key question, right? Were these scholars and mystics basically just daydreaming? Were they just letting their minds drift off into some sleep-like state? Well, all the evidence we have points to a very firm no.
Think about it. Dreams are totally spontaneous. They use a personal grammar that's all about your memories, your emotions. These texts, on the other hand, are completely codified. They use a shared cultural grammar that everyone in that tradition would understand. And where dreams are driven by emotion, these systems are driven by things like authority, tradition, and even a kind of mathematical beauty. The rules aren't just flowing freely, they're locked down. They're stabilized in tables and diagrams. So what we're really looking at here is something we could call disciplined associative cognition. This isn't just someone passively drifting off. No, this was hard work. It was sustained, deliberate, intellectual labor. It's like an architect deciding to build a cathedral, but using the logic and the materials you'd find in a dream. It's building, not drifting. And that brings us to the most fundamental difference of all. This isn't about one way of thinking being smarter or better than another. That's not the point. It's about having completely different goals. It's about asking a different question. What is knowledge even for?
You can see the contrast laid out really clearly here. Modern science, its goal is empirical testing. It validates itself through things we can test and reproduce. It's trying to describe what's objectively out there. But these symbolic systems, their goal was totally different. It was all about internal coherence, how beautifully symmetrical the system was, and whether it lined up with the authority of tradition. The goal wasn't to measure the world, it was to create a framework of meaning within the world.
So let's be super clear. This wasn't some primitive or less developed stage of human thought. The hardware, the human brain, was the same then as it is now. What was different was the software, the operating system, the standards of proof, and the rules for what you would even accept as a valid explanation for something. Those were just different.
So what does all this ancient stuff tell us about our own brains today? Well, it points to something really fundamental, a kind of hunger for patterns that seems to be hardwired into our thinking.
We can actually map all of this out on a kind of spectrum of thinking. On one end, you've got dreaming. That's high association, but almost zero constraints, right? Anything goes. On the complete opposite end, you've got modern scientific modeling. That's very high constraints. You're locked into the data with much less room for free-form association. And where do these esoteric systems fit? Smack dab in the middle. They have that high dreamlike association, but they're guided and shaped by structured cultural rules.
So here's a totally different way to look at all this. Instead of seeing these ancient systems as just, mistakes or failed science, what if we see them as cognitive stabilizers? They were powerful tools for helping people manage a world that was filled with terrifying uncertainty.
And you can see exactly what they did for people. They gave them a sense of coherence when everything felt chaotic and random. They integrated a feeling of meaning into just, everyday life. They gave people a story about cause and effect. And by doing all that, they helped regulate emotion. They were basically meaning-first models of reality. So this all leaves us with a pretty big final thought. That same cognitive engine, the one that produced dreams and these incredibly complex symbolic maps, it's running in your head right now. Our brains are pattern-seeking machines, constantly building models of the world to live in. So the real question, the one to take away from all this, is what patterns and what rules are you using to build your reality?